Joining us now to talk about this is Cristina Finch. She's the Managing Director for the Women's Human Rights Program at Amnesty International USA. Cristina, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
When we talk about gender equality in the United States, first, the good news. The USA is among the top 25 countries in the world when it comes to gender equality, but it's at number 22, behind countries like Cuba, Lesotho, Nicaragua, Philippines. What does that tell us about gender equality in the US?
Well, it tells us that the United States is doing well, but not well enough. The United States still has a long way to go to make sure that women's human rights are fully respected, protected, and fulfilled in areas ranging from sexual and reproductive rights, violence against women, to economic opportunities and healthcare.
Okay, let me take that one thing that you mentioned, the economic opportunities, and we hear this cliche very often, the glass ceiling. Is it still firmly in place? Because when you look at the figures, 4% of CEOs in the Fortune 500 companies, only 4% are women.
Unfortunately, I do believe that glass ceiling still does exist. We still have a long way to go in the United States to ensure women's equal economic opportunity. There is discrimination, both entrenched in legal law and policies, and obviously amongst attitudes as well. I mean, one thing, if you look at family policies and laws in the United States, for example, there's no paid sick leave. There's no paid maternity leave. And when you look at the fact that women are disproportionately the caretakers for both children and parents and other relatives in need, that's definitely a policy change that can unfortunately hold women back in the workplace and families.
And the fact that women don't earn as much as men for doing the same job. I mean, they earn 70 cents per dollar that a man earns. It's 70% of what men earn.
The wage gap still exists. It's real, and we need to narrow this in the United States. Equal policies, equal pay for equal work, and fulfillment of women's human rights. Absolutely.
And violence against women in the United States. Figures put out by the Justice Department here in the United States tell us that that kind of violence is now at a historic low, and those were figures calculated over the last 10 years, the last decade. But that doesn't give us the full picture, because there is still widespread violence in certain areas among certain communities that has not gone down. In fact, it's gone up.
Yes, indeed. Violence against women is a global problem, and right here in the United States, it's a problem as well. Particularly communities such as Native American and Alaska Native women face disproportionately high figures of violence as opposed to the rest of the women in the United States. This comes from not only discrimination and a near lack of impunity for perpetrators, unfortunately.
Is that changing at all? Do you see that changing, or is that coming from, I guess, I don't know, traditional beliefs in those societies, traditional manners in which those societies behave?
No, absolutely not. That's a common misperception. Yeah. What we do see is that 1 in 3 Native women will be raped in their lifetime, and 86% of perpetrators are non-Native. And tribal courts have no jurisdiction to prosecute non-Native perpetrators. So there you see it's a culture of impunity, and it leads to this violence against women in Native communities that is not able to be addressed. And the federal government really needs to take action to solve this.
You mentioned the federal government. Let's look at the U.S. Congress and look at women's representation in the U.S. Congress. I mean, we hear a great deal about Hillary Clinton and the possibility that she may be the president, the first female president in 2016. We, of course, hear a lot about Nancy Pelosi, who was the former Democratic Speaker of the House of Representatives. But at the moment, there are only 20 U.S. senators, 20% of the 100 senators there, and only 18% of representatives in the House of Representatives are women.
And that's not enough.
And those are really small numbers.
Very small.
In this day and age.
And yet those are some of the biggest numbers we've ever seen for the United States. So given that women make up more than 50% of the population, we obviously like to see those numbers come up. So 20% I think is an incredibly low figure. And when you take a look at what those women in the Senate and in the House have been able to do, really played a key role in ending the government shutdown, according to a lot of press reports. I think we really need to see that political participation rise amongst women.
When we look at the last election, the last presidential election, women's issues in many respects were front and center. I mean, especially the issues of reproductive rights, contraception, abortions, things like that. There was a big debate over it. Did it hurt or help the women's cause?
Well, I think that I think it's helped the women's human rights, and these issues are now being discussed. I think one of the reasons that we see, for example, rates of violence, violence against women decreasing, is that it's now recognized as a problem where it hasn't been before, and measures were taken to address the issue. So I think that dialogue around these issues and really education around sexual and reproductive rights and women's human rights will help achieve those rights.
Cristina Finch, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.